The Boeing 737 roared down the runway, lifting gracefully into the evening sky as Flight 417 departed from JFK Airport. Bound for Los Angeles, the cabin buzzed with the usual mix of excitement and fatigue, families heading on vacation, business travelers working on their laptops, and young dreamers staring out the window. Lost in thought, Daniel Hayes, a 32-year-old flight attendant with nearly a decade of experience, moved efficiently down the aisle, his polished shoes making soft taps against the narrow carpet. He had seen it all: nervous first-time flyers, overconfident businessmen demanding extra legroom, and even the occasional medical emergency. But nothing prepared him for the unsettling sight in row 17. A teenage girl, Sophia Lynn, 17, sat stiffly in the window seat, her posture rigid as if she were trying to make herself smaller. Her long, dark hair draped over her face like a curtain, partially obscuring her expression. Beside her, a man in his late 40s, Richard Carter, occupied the aisle seat. He wore expensive sunglasses, unusual for a dimly lit airplane, and his grip on the girl's wrist was firm, possessive. At first glance, they could have passed as family, an uncle traveling with his niece. Perhaps, but Daniel's instincts, honed through years of experience, screamed otherwise. Something was wrong. Sophia barely moved, her gaze fixed on the seatback tray in front of her. Her hands rested tensely on her lap, fingers slightly curled inward, as if suppressing a tremor. Meanwhile, Richard exuded control, his free hand casually draped over the armrest, but his body angled slightly toward the girl, as if blocking her in. Daniel had been trained to notice subtle signs of distress, and he had seen them before. A captive's eyes darting toward the exit, a hand clutching the edge of a seat too tightly, the forced silence of someone too afraid to speak. His stomach tightened. Could this be one of those moments? Daniel made a mental note to observe them more closely. He knew one thing for sure: if his instincts were right, Sophia Lynn might be in danger, and he had to find a way to help her. The airplane hummed steadily as it cruised at 35,000 feet. Somewhere over the vast Midwest, cabin lights were dimmed, and the faint murmur of conversations blended with the occasional chime of the seatbelt sign. Daniel Hayes pushed the beverage cart smoothly down the aisle, keeping his face neutral, his posture relaxed. Just another routine service. But his mind was anything but at ease. His eyes discreetly flickered toward row 17, where Sophia Lynn remained unnervingly still, her hands tightly folded in her lap. Richard Carter sat beside her, his body slightly angled toward the girl, his presence an invisible cage around her. He was watching her. As Daniel reached their row, he plastered on a practiced smile. "Something to drink?" His tone was light, professional, masking the storm brewing inside him. Richard barely looked up. "Water for me," he said coolly. Then, without turning, he added, "and a soda for my niece." Daniel didn't miss the way Sophia flinched at the word niece. Her fingers twitched as she reached for the soda he handed her. And then, it happened. As her hand brushed against his, her fingers curled inward, folding her thumb into her palm, then closing her other fingers over it. A chill shot through Daniel's spine. The signal, a silent distress call, one he had learned during human trafficking awareness training, a subtle gesture that could mean the difference between captivity and rescue. His pulse pounded in his ears. He forced himself to stay composed, not to react, not to let Richard sense that something was off. One wrong move, and he could put Sophia in even greater danger. "Everything okay?" he asked quietly, keeping his voice low enough that only she could hear. Sophia hesitated. Her lips barely moved, but her eyes, dark with fear, flickered to his. And then, a tiny nod. Barely perceptible, but it was enough. Daniel's heart clenched. He couldn't ignore this. He wouldn't. "All right," he said smoothly, turning to Richard. "I'll be right back with some snacks for you both." And with that, he continued pushing the cart down the aisle, his mind racing with the weight of what he had just witnessed. Daniel forced himself to keep moving, his hands steady on the beverage cart as he continued down the aisle. But his mind was in overdrive. Sophia Lynn had just signaled for help. She was in danger. And now, it was up to him to get her out of it. He maneuvered the cart to the rear galley, his movements controlled despite the storm raging inside him. Lisa Morales, his fellow flight attendant and longtime friend, was prepping a fresh pot of coffee when he arrived. She glanced up. "You okay?" Daniel exhaled sharply. "No, we might have a situation." Lisa immediately straightened. "What kind of situation?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Row 17. The girl, Sophia. She gave me the signal." Lisa's breath hitched. "Are you sure?" "Dead sure." A beat of silence. Lisa's eyes darkened with understanding. "What's the plan?" she asked. Her voice firm, steady. Daniel pulled out his crew phone, his fingers moving quickly as he sent a coded message to the cockpit, one they had been trained to use in emergencies like this. "Revolving light, possible human trafficking. ROW 17 need authorities at LAX revolving light." Seconds later, the reply came through. "Understood. Stay calm. Authorities will meet us at the gate. Keep it discreet." Daniel swallowed hard, relief and pressure hitting him at once. Captain Olivia Reynolds was on it. Now, they just had to keep Sophia safe until they landed. Lisa took a deep breath. "All right, we can't let him know we're onto him." Daniel nodded. "Exactly. If he suspects anything, he might hurt her or try something drastic." Lisa's jaw tightened. "Then let's play it smart. I'll keep an eye on them while you stay near the front, in case we need to act fast." Daniel's pulse thrummed as he glanced toward the dimly lit cabin. 2 more hours until landing. 2 hours to keep Sophia safe. Every second mattered. The cabin lights dimmed further as the flight progressed, casting a soft glow over the passengers. Some were dozing, their heads resting against the windows or slumping onto folded arms. Others remained awake, lost in their books, movies, or quiet conversations. But Emily Brooks wasn't one of them. A high school teacher from San Francisco. Emily had spent years observing teenagers, their mannerisms, their anxieties, the subtle ways they expressed distress without words. From the moment she boarded, she had noticed the girl in row 17. Something about her didn't sit right. Her stiff posture, the way she barely moved, the haunted look in her eyes. And then there was the man beside her, Richard Carter, his presence too overbearing, too controlling. Emily had seen toxic control before, in students with abusive parents, manipulative partners, and even those caught in dangerous situations they didn't know how to escape from. She had a gut feeling, and she always trusted her gut. When Daniel Hayes walked by her row, she seized the moment. "You see it too, don't you?" she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. Daniel froze for half a second, then turned slightly, his expression careful. He met her eyes, sharp, perceptive, and gave a barely perceptible nod. That was all the confirmation she needed. Emily's heart pounded. This was real. She wasn't imagining it, and she wasn't alone in seeing it. Daniel glanced quickly toward row 17, then back at her. "Stay alert," he murmured. "I may need your help." Emily swallowed hard, her jaw tightening with quiet determination. "Just say the word," she replied. She wasn't a flight attendant. She wasn't law enforcement. But she was a teacher. And teachers protected their students. Even if the girl in row 17 wasn't one of hers, tonight she would be. The hum of the engines filled the cabin. But the atmosphere around row 17 had changed. Richard Carter was growing suspicious. His jaw was clenched, his posture rigid, his fingers, once casually resting on the armrest, now gripped the edge of his seat. Something felt off, and he knew it. Beside him, Sophia Lynn was trying to shrink into herself. But she wasn't quick enough. Richard leaned in, his breath hot against her ear. "What did you do?" he hissed. Sophia's entire body went still. Her fingers curled into fists on her lap, and a shudder ran through her. She didn't dare look at him. I didn't do anything," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the drone of the plane. Richard's grip on her wrist tightened. Daniel Hayes, standing near the galley, caught the movement. He had been keeping an eye on them, his instincts on high alert. He could feel the shift. Richard was onto them. Daniel's stomach knotted. If Richard suspected that she had asked for help, he might try to retaliate right here, right now. Sophia looked terrified. They were running out of time. He turned to Lisa Morales, his voice low but urgent. "We need to act now." Lisa's expression darkened. She didn't hesitate. "I'll alert the captain," she whispered back. Daniel nodded, his pulse pounding. They had a plan, but now, they had seconds, not minutes, to execute it. Sophia's life depended on it. The cabin remained quiet, Passengers lost in their own worlds, oblivious to the growing storm in row 17. Daniel Hayes felt every second stretching unbearably long. Richard Carter was tense, suspicious. If they didn't act now, they could lose their chance. Lisa Morales slipped toward the intercom, her voice calm and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing slight turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." It was the signal. Across the aisle, Emily Brooks took a deep breath. She knew what she had to do. With a carefully calculated movement, she stood, fumbling with her bag. Then, she dropped it. The heavy thud landed right at Richard's feet. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Emily gasped, bending down hurriedly, her hands deliberately clumsy as she tried to retrieve her belongings. Richard's attention flicked away from Sophia Lynn for a split second. That was all Daniel needed. He moved swiftly, his voice firm but polite. "Sir, there's been a seating issue. We need you to move to first class immediately." Richard's head snapped up, his eyes narrowed. "What? That doesn't make any sense." Daniel kept his stance professional, unwavering. "It's a security protocol. Sir, please cooperate." Richard's fingers twitched. His grip on Sophia's arm tightened. Daniel felt his pulse spike. "Sir, I insist." Right on cue, two male crew members appeared at Richard's side. Their presence was non-threatening, but their message was clear. He wasn't being given a choice. Richard exhaled sharply, jaw clenched, but with passengers around, with eyes starting to drift toward the commotion, he had no way to refuse without drawing even more attention. With a sharp glare, he let go of Sophia's wrist and stood. As he was escorted away, Lisa wasted no time. She knelt beside Sophia, her voice soft but urgent. "You're safe now. Come with me." Sophia's lips trembled, her eyes, once filled with silent desperation, welled with tears. For the first time in hours, she exhaled, and then, as Lisa gently took her hand, she followed her to safety. The seatbelt sign blinked on, and a voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our final descent into Los Angeles. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened." But for Daniel Hayes, the real descent had already begun. He stood near the galley, watching Richard Carter in the front section of the plane, his body rigid with barely contained anger. Two crew members sat nearby, keeping a close eye on him. Sophia Lynn was tucked safely in the back, wrapped in a soft airline blanket, her hands still trembling but her breathing steady. Lisa Morales sat beside her, whispering reassurances. The entire cabin remained unaware of the storm that had just passed. Outside the window, Los Angeles shimmered below, a sprawling city of neon lights and endless streets. But Daniel wasn't focused on the view. His eyes were locked on the fleet of emergency vehicles already lined up near their gate. The moment the wheels touched the runway, the tension inside Daniel's chest finally loosened, but just slightly. As soon as the plane came to a full stop, a team of law enforcement officers boarded, moving with quiet efficiency. Richard barely had time to react. A tall officer approached him. "Richard Carter, you are under arrest." For the first time, panic flickered in Richard's eyes. He opened his mouth to protest, but before he could utter a word, cold metal cuffs snapped around his wrists. Passengers gasped as they watched the scene unfold. Some exchanged confused murmurs, others simply stared. Richard's expression twisted with fury as he was hauled to his feet. But he had no way out. Daniel watched, his heartbeat slowing as the officers led Richard down the aisle and off the plane. It was over. In the back, Sophia's breath hitched as she watched him disappear. Her fingers clutched the edges of the blanket wrapped around her. Lisa gave her a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. "You're safe now." A female social worker stepped forward, her eyes warm, her tone gentle. "Sophia? My name is Claire. I'm here to help." Sophia hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to believe it. She really was safe. The last of the passengers had disembarked. The cabin, once filled with the hum of quiet conversations and the shuffle of movement, was now eerily silent. Daniel Hayes sat in an empty row near the back, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped together. Exhaustion hit him all at once. It was over, but the weight of it still pressed on his chest. Footsteps approached, and he looked up to see Captain Olivia Reynolds standing beside him. Her expression was unreadable at first, but then she reached out. giving his shoulder a firm pat. "You saved her life today." Daniel exhaled, shaking his head slightly. "I just did what I had to do." Captain Reynolds gave him a knowing look. Not everyone would have noticed. Not everyone would have acted. Daniel let her words sink in. She was right. If he had brushed off the small signs, the stiffness in Sophia Lynn's posture, the fear in her eyes, the silent distress signal, she could still be trapped. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. Lisa Morales slid into the seat across from him, her usual playful smirk replaced by quiet reflection. "You think she'll be okay?" Daniel nodded slowly. "She's safe now. That's what matters." Lisa sighed. "Yeah, but what about the others?" That question sat heavy in the air. Because Sophia wasn't the only one. How many other victims were out there, on other flights, in other cities, silently waiting for someone to notice? The next morning, news of the rescue spread like wildfire. Major news outlets picked up the story. Headlines read, "Flight attendant saves teen from human trafficking." Mid-flight weeks had passed since Flight 417. But the memory of that night never left Daniel Hayes. He had returned to his usual routine, checking boarding passes, assisting passengers, and ensuring flights ran smoothly. But something inside him had changed. He wasn't just going through the motions anymore. One evening, as he prepared for a red-eye flight, an envelope arrived at his apartment. His name was handwritten on the front, the ink slightly smudged. No return address. Frowning, he opened it. Inside was a simple note. "Thank you for believing in me. I'm safe now because of you." It was signed, Sophia Lynn. Daniel sat down, staring at the paper. The words were small, but their weight was immeasurable. Sophia was safe. She had made it home. For a long moment, he just breathed, letting the tension he hadn't even realized he was holding finally ease. But then, another thought surfaced. Heroic airline crew helps rescue girl after subtle hand signal. It wasn't just another sensational news story, it sparked something deeper. People started talking. Experts went on morning shows, discussing the warning signs of human trafficking and why flight attendants played a critical role in stopping it. Parents shared safety tips with their children. Social media exploded with conversations about awareness and action. And Daniel? He wasn't just a flight attendant anymore. He was part of something bigger. The ones who wouldn't be lucky enough to sit next to someone who noticed. The ones whose silent signals would go unanswered? Daniel knew he couldn't just move on. Within a month, he had partnered with anti-trafficking organizations to train flight crews. He spoke at airline safety conferences, teaching attendants how to recognize the subtle signs of trafficking, the same signs that had saved Sophia. He met with airline executives, advocating for mandatory trafficking awareness training across all carriers. His voice, once just another announcement over the intercom, was now part of something bigger. And he wasn't alone. Sophia Lynn, now safe with her family, had found her own purpose. She began sharing her story, speaking at schools and youth centers, raising awareness so that other girls like her would know they weren't alone. She turned her nightmare into a mission. One flight, one signal, one moment of awareness. That's all it had taken to change a life. And now, that single act of courage was saving countless others. Because heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes, they wear flight attendant uniforms. And sometimes, they just pay attention. The end. Thank you for watching. This story is a powerful reminder that sometimes, the smallest actions can make the biggest difference. Awareness saves lives. If you found this video valuable, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more eye-opening stories. And remember, stay vigilant, stay informed, and never underestimate the power of paying attention. See you in the next video.